Good evening, I'm Nick Schifrin. Tonight on PBS News Weekend, abortion and the most vulnerable, how women on Medicaid are navigating rapidly changing rules across the country. Then Desperate Journey, an Afghan who fled the Taliban, got caught up in a European border dispute and survived by hiding in the woods for 8 days.
We asked them to kill us, please, the soldiers. Please kill us, finish this story. But they didn't. They didn't.
And aces at Wimbledon. The women's final at the All England Lawn Tennis Club serves up a few firsts. All that in the day's headlines on tonight's PBS News Weekend.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
We begin tonight with breaking news as the island nation of Sri Lanka has descended into political turmoil. The country's president and prime minister will both resign, bowing to pressure after protests rocked the capital, Colombo. Tens of thousands of demonstrators broke through barricades and stormed the presidential residence, forcing him to evacuate. Crowds shouted and cheered as they roamed the halls, climbed statues, and defaced property. Separately, protesters broke into the prime minister's private residence and set it on fire. The crowds were a crescendo of Sri Lankans' discontent against leadership they deem responsible for the nation's worst economic crisis in a generation.
To get rid of the president and the prime minister and to have a new era for Sri Lanka. Also, I feel very, very sad that they didn't go earlier, because had they gone earlier, there wouldn't have been any destruction. And it's time that we got all our stolen money back to this country.
Sri Lanka's president will officially step down next week. In Japan, we're learning more about the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Investigators say the man suspected of killing Abe believed Abe was linked to a religious cult that the suspect blamed for his own mother's financial ruin. Police would not name the group. Authorities continue to question the 41-year-old former member of Japan's Navy who's admitted to shooting Abe with a homemade gun made from 2 metal pipes wrapped in black tape. At the site of the shooting today, mourners paid their respects, laying bouquets and shedding tears. And the hearse carrying Abe's body drove over 300 miles from the small town of Nara, where he died, to Abe's home in Tokyo. His funeral will be held early next week. Secretary of State Antony Blinken today chastised China for what he called its continuing support of Russia for its war in Ukraine. In Indonesia, at a G20 meeting, Blinken met China's foreign minister for more than 5 hours. Later, at a news conference, Blinken said he detailed Russia's aggression and refuted China's claim of neutrality.
I shared again with the State Councilor that we are concerned about the PRC's alignment with Russia. Now, what you hear from Beijing is that it claims to be neutral. I would start with the proposition that it's pretty hard to be neutral when it comes to this aggression. There's a clear aggressor, there's a clear victim.
China's foreign minister sharply rebuked Blinken's comments and called on the Biden administration to swiftly remove Trump-era tariffs on Chinese products. President Biden has not yet announced whether he will adjust those tariffs. In the tennis world, the Wimbledon women's final today was a match of firsts. Elena Rybakina became the first tennis player representing Kazakhstan to win a Grand Slam singles title. She was born in Moscow but switched her nationality 4 years ago. Her opponent, Tunisian Ons Jabeur, made history by being the first Arab and first African women to appear in any Grand Slam final. We'll have more on this year's Wimbledon tournament later in the broadcast. And across the globe, millions of Muslims have begun the Feast of Sacrifice, Eid al-Adha. The observance lasts 4 days and is one of the biggest holidays in the Islamic calendar. It's typically celebrated with a ritual slaughter of livestock that's shared with friends and family. But rising food costs around the world have made it unaffordable for many Muslims this year. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, Desperate Journey. An Afghan refugee flees the Taliban only to get caught up in geopolitics and a violent crackdown in Europe. And tennis history in the making at Wimbledon.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
Across the country, states are struggling to determine whether and how to provide the most vulnerable access to abortion. 1 of every 5 American women between the ages of 15 and 49 is covered by Medicaid. For decades, congressional regulations have prohibited federal funds from being used for abortions except in the cases of rape, incest, and if the pregnancy threatens the woman's life. But Medicaid is a federal and state program, allowing 16 states to pay for abortions outside federal restrictions. How are states approaching this challenge now? To discuss this, I'm joined by Alina Salganikov, a senior vice president at the Kaiser Family Foundation, and Marcia Jones of the Afia Center, a reproductive justice organization in Texas. Welcome, both of you, to PBS News Weekend. Alina Salganikov, let me start with you. Are states today that protect abortion rights adjusting their Medicaid policies to help women seeking abortion?
They're trying to do what they can to protect abortion access in terms of protecting clinicians and women from criminality in other states, as well as providing funds. And also supporting infrastructure so that abortion clinics have the necessary means to provide abortions not only for the women who reside in those states, but from people who will be coming from other states as well.
Marcia Jones, who is bearing the brunt of this problem when it comes to abortion access and Medicaid?
So poor women are bearing the brunt of this, specifically poor non-white women. So poor Black women, poor Hispanic women, poor Indigenous women are bearing the brunt. So the folk who have the least access are the folk who are bearing the brunt of this.
Alina Salganikov, I think it's important that you explain one thing, which is, can a woman travel across state borders using Medicaid in order to get an abortion in a state that still has abortion rights?
Typically, Medicaid only pays for services that are provided in the state. So there are cases where Medicaid can pay for care out of state, but that's very unusual, and the out-of-state provider has to have a relationship with Medicaid. I will say that all of the women that will be with Medicaid who will be needing to travel out of state, it is very unlikely that their Medicaid program will pay for their abortions, even in cases of rape or incest.
And so, Marcia Jones, given that restriction, given the people who you said you've been trying to help, what are you hearing from the women who are reaching out to you?
So we're hearing women who are without resources, who are without a plan, who are without a next step. They literally don't know what to do. Even when you're hearing conversations that say the abortion pill will be available, self-managed abortions, not if you're already 14 weeks gestation, not if you're already late in gestation. That sounds good, but it's not going to be available for the women that we serve. And we're talking about Texas. We are talking about Texas. No exception.
Alina Salganikov, on Friday, President Biden issued an executive order aimed at protecting access to reproductive health services. Will it have any impact on this discussion that we're having right now?
I think the president wanted to make clear that he was putting the full force of the federal government to the extent possible to assure that people have access to the full range of reproductive health services. The issue is that the Supreme Court has turned this back to the states. So while the federal government, I think, can do some things, and the president has directed the Secretary and the Department of Justice to try to put protections in place, it will be limited because you are going to have states that have full-on bans. It's going to be really impossible for a lot of women to cross the state, go across the state and long distances to get abortions, regardless of what the federal government does.
And Alina Salganikov, just staying with you, in terms of this question of Medicaid and access, what do you say to those people who are against federally guaranteed abortion rights?
Well, the Supreme Court has had a long-standing precedent that established the right to abortion. This decision is the first one that's taken away any constitutional right. So regardless of where you stand, this decision will have seismic repercussions that affect abortion access most directly, but also will have implications for a broad range of services that are important to women, ranging from emergency care, cancer care, care for autoimmune diseases. I think the ripple effects are just emerging. And so this is going to affect you regardless of where you stand on the abortion debate.
And finally, Marsha Jones, I wonder if you could explain what would happen to you if you were to help a woman in Texas cross the state line to get an abortion.
If I help someone across the state line, because it's aiding and abetting, it's very clear. Aiding and abetting, giving people money, helping them to cross the state lines. We're even limited to the information that we can give because we are trying to provide people with a basic health care need, because reproductive health care is health care, could literally be criminalized.
Marsha Jones, Alina Salganikov, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, almost 4 million Ukrainian refugees have fled their homes into neighboring Poland. The country has welcomed them warmly, and the government provides access to all social services. But at the same time, Poland has pulled the welcome mat from thousands of Middle Eastern migrants. Ali Rogan has the story of one Afghan refugee whose journey shows not all migrants are treated equally.
Khaled Mohebi never wanted to leave Afghanistan. He had a good life as a software developer and coach of a computer programming team, a life made possible by peace.
We were developing, nobody think about it that one day Taliban will come back, because nobody support them.
But they did come back as the United States withdrew last August. Khaled worked for an American company. He knew he had to flee. He had a U.S. visa, but like so many Afghans, was turned away at the Kabul airport. So he began an almost 3,000-mile journey by car. He made it to Iran, and from there flew to Moscow in mid-September, where his programming team was set to compete a few months later. But after the games, Russia wanted to send them back. Khaled's Russian contacts suggested he travel to Poland on foot through Belarus.
They asked us to go there illegally. We said, oh, why? We are educated, we are from national team, we can go anywhere illegally. Why we do it, and why we play a game with our life?
But he realized Russia was willing to play that game. So Khaled and his friends devised a plan.
2 days before our visa expired, we bought some jackets and we traveled there. And we thought that, okay, when we arrive to the Polish border, we will show our documents and everything, and they will help us.
But Khaled didn't know that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, an ally of Russia's Vladimir Putin, was playing his own dangerous game, luring migrants from the Middle East and South Asia, then pushing them to the borders of his Western neighbors. The group arrived at the Polish border in mid-October, walking straight into the no-man's land of a hybrid war, facing barbed wire and armed guards. They hid in the wilderness for 4 days, then tried to escape back to Belarus, but were caught.
They shocked me by electric shock, and hunter dog destroyed this part of my jacket and my face and hand. And finally, the soldier fired 10 or 5 centimeter distance with my head by gun. They said, okay, now we didn't kill you, so you have another chance. You can go to the Poland. Don't come back. And we saw, oh, how? Because we didn't have food, water, we didn't eat anything for 4 days.
But he still had his smartphone with a little bit of power left. So he posted an SOS on Facebook, writing, "There is a Cold War between Belarus and Europe, and we are the cannon fodder."
We received messages from all around the world.
One message was from Polish journalist Andrzej Meller, who had lived for years in Afghanistan but recently moved back to a small town on the Polish-Belarus border.
I got a message from Herat, from a friend, who wrote to me that few of his Afghan friends, IT engineers, they are somewhere in the middle of the jungle at the border between Poland and Belarus. So he asked me, Andrzej, I think you live there. There's a kind of a war there. Could you help them?
Meller also called Fundacja Ocaleni, a Polish volunteer group dedicated to helping migrants.
We decided that we will do it officially, legally. We will call the border guard and they will ask for asylum in Poland. At the same time, local television and other media, radio will come to the spot.
By the time the volunteers and cameras reached Khaled and his friends, they had been in the woods 8 days, all near death.
Taliban is better than them, I think. We asked them to kill us, please, the soldiers. Please kill us, finish this story, but they didn't.
He was really brave. It looked like he was taking responsibility for the whole group on some level.
Mariana Vartetska was among the volunteers who met Khaled.
They give us food, water, and clothes and everything, and I can't forget that. And I swear there, okay, I will help other guys like them one day, because they were like angel. They arrived there and they saved us.
Mariana told Khaled he'd have to go with the Polish border guards to apply for protection.
He asked me if I could promise him that it was going to be okay. I remember his face and his eyes when I had to tell him that I couldn't promise him that it was going to be okay, because I didn't know that.
But the guards' behavior towards Khaled changed when they had an audience.
This time it was different, they didn't push us back to the Belarus, and they act very normal and standard, like we are good police and we will not send you back.
Once Khaled applied for international protection, he spent a few weeks in a refugee camp. And a few weeks later, he moved in with a family in Warsaw and applied for a work permit. When we spoke, he had recently moved into his own apartment. But Khaled's journey is not over. Just a few weeks after our interview, he learned he wouldn't get an update on his work permit until October, due to the influx of Ukrainian refugees. He was running out of money, so he left for Germany, where he has a job offer and better prospects for a work permit. And he lives in a refugee camp he says is much nicer than the one in Poland. Mariana Vartetska says Poland is still treating non-Europeans at the border harshly, while Ukrainians receive a warm welcome.
I'm very happy that they are getting the help they needed. I think that's how it should look like in a situation like this. But it is very frustrating when you compare it to how badly the asylum seekers on the Belarusian border are treated.
But that hasn't stopped Khaled from trying to pay his good fortune forward. When he was in Poland, he volunteered at a shelter for Ukrainian refugees.
After everything you have been through, where do you find the ability and the desire to help Ukrainian refugees?
When you help somebody, a refugee, and when you see he's happy and a smile, it will send you a positive energy, and it will help me too.
Even while his own future in Europe is uncertain, Khaled is already making good on his pledge to help others like him. For PBS News Weekend, I'm Ali Rogan.
On the English grass at center court, today's Wimbledon women's final was destined to be historic. Elena Rybakina became the first ever player representing Kazakhstan to win a Grand Slam. She beat Tunisia's Ons Jabeur, the first woman from Africa to reach a Grand Slam final. To discuss this, I'm joined from Wimbledon by New York Times tennis correspondent and author Christopher Clarey. Christopher Clarey, welcome to PBS News Weekend. Both women's stories, of course, are interesting. First, Rybakina, how did she win, and how did she end up playing for Kazakhstan?
Well, Elena Rybakina is a very powerful 6-footer who can run like a deer, to be honest with you. And she played a wonderful match today and started a bit slowly, was nervous. I mean, both women are in uncharted territory for them, not ever having gotten past the quarterfinals in a Grand Slam before in singles. So you didn't know how they were going to react. Rybakina had trouble with her strokes early, and she really found her rhythm in the second and third sets, started dominating with her big flat shots, tracked down a lot of Jabeur's signature drop shots, and finished it off. And the amazing thing was when she won, this is the biggest moment of her life, it was like she basically had just won the first point of the match. Hardly any expression on her part, hardly any emotion, but the emotion came later in the press conference when she broke down in tears. But on the court, you never would have known it was her first Wimbledon title.
And tell us about her story. She decided to play for Kazakhstan 4 years ago. How did that come about?
There have been a number of Russian players over the years when they've been lacking funding at home. We'll look to some of the other Soviet republics where the funding's greater, looking for some athletes who can play certain sports, and they make a shift. She wasn't the first, but she was in many ways one of the most recent ones to do it. And at the time, she wasn't considered one of the most promising Russian juniors, wasn't getting the funding that she needed, and so she decided to switch. Doesn't speak Kazakh. Obviously, there's language there is Kazakh and Russian, big former republic. And, she got coaching, all kinds of support. And we just talked to her a few minutes ago, and she was saying she wasn't sure she would have actually won this title if she hadn't had that backing from Kazakhstan. But the timing, of course, is awkward for the club and for people in tennis because Russians and Belarusians have been banned from Wimbledon this year because of the invasion of Ukraine. And I don't think the England club had in mind to having a ethnic Russian who grew up in Russia and recently lived there receiving the trophy on the center court today. That wasn't part of the operational plan.
Well, there's always politics when it comes to this, so tell us about that decision that Wimbledon made. The other Grand Slam tennis tournaments have not banned Russians. Why did Wimbledon?
Look, I think it was a combination of factors. You're right. Wimbledon is really an outlier on this issue in tennis, not so much in world sport, but definitely in tennis. And I'm thinking, I think, was the British government, led then by Boris Johnson, was pretty adamant that there had to be some sort of either concession from the Russian players that they were to take part, some sort of a denunciation of their government and its objectives in Ukraine, or some other sort of gesture. And I felt the club here that runs Wimbledon felt they had to do something. And they didn't want to make the players basically go against their country publicly. It could have put their families at risk. So they decided to just ban Russians and Belarusians altogether, which has been a long time since that happened in tennis, since post-World War II era with the Germans and the Japanese. So it's pretty extraordinary. And there was a lot of reaction within the tennis tours. They took away the ranking points, which is unprecedented from Wimbledon, which created a lot of backlash. The players who did very well here this year, for example, will not rise in the ranking. Some of them will even drop.
Let's talk about Ons Jabeur. The crowd seemed to be behind her, certainly, all day. She's well-liked on the tour. She's known as the Minister of Happiness. What does she represent for the women's games?
Well, look, I think people were really excited, and they still are, about Ons Jabeur and all that she can bring to tennis and to sports. There aren't that many people in the history of this game from Arab nations or from the African continent on the women's side who've done particularly well. Ons is an exceptional talent, and she's very charismatic, extremely likable. Her game is magnetic, all kinds of variety and style and panache there. So I think really everybody was sort of primed to celebrate that, and in some ways, Elena Rybakina upset the apple cart in that regard. But I think Ons, what she brings is a chance to really reach a whole new audience and market, not just for women's tennis, but for women's sports. And people here in the game and at Wimbledon are very aware of that.
And on the men's side, of course, we should talk about that. Novak Djokovic going for his 7th Wimbledon. He's facing the fiery, the unpredictable Nick Kyrgios. Could a win for Djokovic, you think, cement his legacy as the greatest of all time?
Look, I personally don't believe in that debate. I think there's too much that's changed over the years to compare the greats of the past long ago with the greats of today. The Grand Slam tournaments didn't matter as much in terms of the counting all your numbers of titles back in the days of Rod Laver and Ken Rosewall and Bill Tilden, if you want to go way back, as they do now. Not everybody played them for a long time either. But in terms of this era and what it represents, that number of who has the most Grand Slam singles titles is big. And right now, Rafael Nadal, who had to pull out of here with an injury, has 22. Djokovic and Roger Federer have 20. And Djokovic is very, very committed to chasing that number down. He has been number one longer than any other player in this era. He has winning head-to-head records against Nadal and Federer. So this is a huge match for him. And he may not be able to play the U.S. Open at all because he remains unvaccinated and may not be able to get into the country as the way the rules stand right now.
Christopher Clarey of the New York Times joining us from Wimbledon. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Online, a methane leak in a suburban California community made some residents sick. Environmental groups fear it's just the tip of the iceberg. Dozens of wells belonging to 5 different companies have been found to be leaking. Read why some are pushing for more action at pbs.org/newshour. And that's our show for tonight. I'm Nick Schifrin. For all of us at PBS News Weekend, I hope you had a good day. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.